The phone rang at 3:14 in the morning. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, and the numbers on my clock had become a kind of company. When the phone rang that late, my hands started shaking before I even answered. Nobody calls at 3 a.m. with good news. Hello? My voice cracked. Silence. Then breathing. Then a voice I didn't recognize, tight with tears. Is this Helen Brooks? Yes. Who is this? I'm calling about Noah. My stomach dropped. What happened to him? Where is he? The woman on the line hesitated. You need to come to the hospital. Now. I didn't ask which hospital. I already knew. I'd driven him there myself, twice in the last 2 months, and told myself both times it was nothing. I grabbed my coat over my nightgown and walked out into the cold without even checking if I'd locked the door. Before I tell you what I found in that hospital room, you need to understand how a 72-year-old widow ended up loving a 25-year-old man enough to run out into the night for him. Because everyone in my life had a theory, and every single one of them was wrong. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and tell me in the comments which country you're watching from. 2 years ago, I was nothing but a shadow in my own house. My husband, Richard, had been gone for 6 years by then. Heart attack, sudden, no warning, no goodbye. One evening he was complaining about the football, and the next morning he simply didn't wake up. After that, the house got quiet in a way that scared me. I used to talk to the walls just to hear a human voice, even if it was my own. My daughter Claire called every Sunday. 10 minutes, always the same questions. Are you eating? Are you taking your pills? Do you need anything? Never how are you feeling, Mom? Never do you miss him? I didn't blame her. Grief makes people awkward, even with their own mothers. So I filled my days with small things. Gardening, crossword puzzles, long walks along the river near my house, because movement was the only thing that made the silence bearable. That's where I met Noah. He was crouched by the water, camera pressed to his eye, so still he looked like part of the landscape. Sorry, he said, noticing me trying to walk around him. Am I in your way? Only if you're planning on staying there all winter. He laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of him. Fair enough. I kept walking. I didn't think about him again until the next morning, when he was there again, in the exact same spot. You again, I said. You again, he said back, grinning. That became our routine. Small talk by the river, nothing more. Until the morning I slipped on the wet grass and went down hard. He was there in seconds, kneeling beside me before I'd even registered the pain in my ankle. Don't move, let me look. I'm fine, Helen. It was the first time he'd used my name. I hadn't even told him. Let me help. I found out later he'd asked around the neighborhood, wanting to know who the woman by the river was. That should have been my first warning sign. Instead, it was the first time in 6 years someone had made an effort to know my name. He drove me to the clinic himself, waited 2 hours in the plastic chairs, drinking bad vending machine coffee, until they confirmed it was only a sprain. You didn't have to stay, I told him in the car after. I know, he said. I wanted to. Something in the way he said it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt in years. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong about that too. The visits became a habit. Tea on my porch, long conversations about nothing and everything. He told me about his mother, who'd left when he was 9, and how he'd raised himself on his father's silence and a stack of second-hand photography books. You never talk about her without your jaw tightening, I said once. He looked at me, startled. Nobody's ever noticed that before. I notice things. Comes with getting old. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes that time. I didn't know it then, but that was the first small crack in the door. The first sign that Noah Carter was a man who buried things instead of facing them. I would remember that months later, in a hospital corridor, wishing I'd pushed harder. But that morning, all I saw was a lonely young man and a lonely old woman, finding something neither of us expected to find again. It was Claire who said it first, out loud, the words I knew everyone was already thinking. Mom, what is this? Really? We were in my kitchen. She'd come for Sunday lunch and found Noah's jacket still hanging on my chair from the night before. It's nothing you need to worry about. He's 25, Mom. You're 72. What could he possibly want from a woman his grandmother's age? The word want hit harder than she probably meant it to. Maybe he just likes my company. Claire laughed, short and bitter. Nobody just likes the company of someone 47 years older than them. Not unless there's something in it for them. You think he's after Richard's pension, the house. I think, she said carefully, that you're lonely. And lonely people don't always see clearly. I wanted to scream at her. Instead, I said nothing, because some small, cruel part of me wondered if she was right. That night, I lay awake running numbers in my head. My savings, the house. What a young man with an unstable freelance income might see when he looked at a woman like me. I hated myself for thinking it. I hated myself more the next morning, when Noah showed up with 2 coffees and a bag of pastries, and I found myself watching him a little too closely, looking for the greed I'd been told must be there. He caught me staring. What? Nothing. Helen. He set the coffee down. What did someone say to you? I told him. All of it. Claire's words, my own ugly suspicion. He went quiet for a long moment. You think I'm here for your money? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. He stood, and for a second, I thought he was going to leave and never come back. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and dropped it on the table in front of me. Look. Go on. Look at everything in there. Noah, don't be ridiculous. I mean it. Bank statements are in the second pocket, on my phone. Look at every penny I own. I want you to see it. I didn't look. I couldn't. Something about the offer itself, the rawness of it, told me everything I needed to know. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't apologize to me. His voice cracked slightly. Apologize to whoever made you think that little of yourself. That the only reason someone young could love you is because of what's in your bank account. Love. He hadn't meant to say it. I could tell by the way his face changed the second the word left his mouth. Neither of us said anything else that morning, but something had shifted, and we both knew it. You'd think that would have been the hardest part. It wasn't. The hardest part came 6 weeks later. On a Tuesday I'll never forget. I started noticing small things after that conversation. Things I'd been too distracted to see before. Noah wincing when he stood up too fast. Noah sitting down halfway through our walks, blaming a long night. Noah losing weight in a way that had nothing to do with a healthy diet. You've lost weight, I said one afternoon. Freelance life. Feast or famine? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The same smile from the day he mentioned his mother. I let it go. I shouldn't have. Then came the day he canceled our walk for the first time in 8 months. Just tired, he texted. Rain check? Something in my chest twisted. Some instinct built from decades of nursing, decades of watching bodies fail in small ways before the big ones. I'd spent 30 years as a nurse. I knew the difference between tired and something being wrong. I called him. He didn't answer. I called again. Nothing. By the third call, I was already putting my shoes on. His flat was above a bakery, small, cluttered with camera equipment and half-developed photographs pinned to every wall. He answered the door pale, sweating, one hand braced against the frame. Helen, you shouldn't have... What's wrong with you? Nothing, Noah. I used the voice I hadn't used since my last shift on the ward, the one that left no room for lies. What is wrong? He looked at me for a long moment. Something behind his eyes broke. Can I come in first? I nodded and followed him inside, my heart already sinking with a fear I couldn't name yet. He sat on the edge of his unmade bed, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. 6 months ago, he started. I went in for headaches, bad ones, the kind that don't go away with paracetamol. My mouth went dry. They did scans. Noah, there's a mass in my brain. They're calling it, his voice caught, inoperable, in the spot it's in. They're trying chemo first, see if it shrinks enough to change that. The room tilted slightly. I sat down hard on the small wooden chair by his desk. How long have you known? Since March. March. I did the math in my head, horrified. That's before we even... Noah, that's 4 months. 4 months you've known and said nothing. I didn't want you to know me as a diagnosis. That's not your decision to make for me. Helen." His eyes were wet now, red-rimmed. "You already lost a husband. I watched what that did to you, even in the small things you never talk about. I wasn't going to be another person who made you plan a funeral." The words hit me like a slap. "So instead, you let me fall in love with you, and prepared to disappear without warning?" The word love hung in the air between us, spoken plainly for the first time by either of us. He didn't deny it. Neither did I. "I was scared," he whispered. "I'm still scared." I crossed the room and took his face in both hands, the way I used to hold my patients' faces on the worst nights of their lives, the nights that needed a human touch more than any medicine. "You listen to me," I said. "I did not survive losing Richard by hiding from the truth. I survived it by facing every single terrible day of it. If you think loving you means I get to skip the hard parts, you don't understand what love is." He broke then, completely, sobbing into my shoulder like the frightened young man he actually was, underneath all that careful independence. I held him and thought, this is what Claire will never understand. This isn't about age. This is about who shows up when everything falls apart. But even as I held him, a small, terrified voice in the back of my mind asked a question I wasn't ready to answer. What if this is the beginning of losing him too? Please don't scroll past this. If this story is moving you even a little, hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know. The next few months blurred into hospital waiting rooms and treatment schedules. I went to every appointment. I held his hand through infusions that made him sick for days afterward. I learned the names of nurses, the shift changes, the particular way the vending machine on the third floor ate coins if you didn't jiggle the handle first. Claire found out eventually. She showed up at my door, white-faced. "Mum, is it true? He's sick?" "Yes." "And you're still—" She stopped herself. "Still what, Claire?" "Still choosing to love someone through something hard, instead of running from it because it's inconvenient?" She didn't have an answer for that. "I was wrong about him," she said finally, quietly. "I judged him because of his age. Because it was easier than admitting someone could actually see you the way you deserved to be seen." It was the closest thing to an apology she'd ever given me. Noah's treatment had good days and terrible ones. On the good days, he'd pick up his camera again, photograph me at the kitchen table, laugh about nothing. On the terrible ones, he'd stare at the ceiling for hours, and I'd sit beside him, saying nothing, because sometimes presence matters more than words. "Tell me something true," he said one of those nights, his voice thin with exhaustion. "About what?" "Anything. I'm tired of thinking about scans and cell counts. Tell me something real." I thought for a moment. When Richard died, I thought I'd never let myself feel anything that big again. I built walls so high I didn't even notice I was living behind them. Then a scrawny photographer wouldn't stop taking pictures of a river until I had no choice but to notice him. He laughed, weak but real. "Scrawny? You've lost weight, dear. I'm allowed to say scrawny." He reached for my hand. "I'm glad the walls came down," he whispered. "So am I said, even knowing what it might cost. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, that the cost might be everything. The scans in September were good. The mass had shrunk. Not gone, but smaller, manageable, the doctors said, with cautious optimism in their voices that felt like the first real breath either of us had taken in months. We celebrated quietly. Tea on the porch, his camera between us, taking photos of ordinary things. The teapot, my hands, the garden gone gold with autumn. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Go on." "When this is over, and it will be over, one way or another, I don't want you to have spent this whole time waiting for bad news. I want you to have actually lived it with me, not just survived it. I have been living it, Noah." "I know. I just needed to say it out loud." He hesitated. "Marry me." I stared at him. "Noah, I know what people will say. I know the math doesn't make sense to anyone but us. But I don't care what makes sense to anyone else. I care what's true, and the truth is, I have never in my life felt as understood as I do sitting next to you." I thought of Claire's warnings. of the strangers who'd stared at us in restaurants, of the numbers that would never stop being unusual to other people. And I thought of Richard, and the years of ordinary love we'd built, and how none of it had prepared me for the particular, unexpected gift of being seen again at 72. "Yes," I said. "Yes, Noah." He kissed me like the answer had saved his life. Maybe in some small way it had. But this isn't where the story ends. Remember the phone call I told you about at the very beginning? We married in November, small, just Claire and two of Noah's oldest friends, in the garden behind my house. For 3 months, things were good. Ordinary. Scans stable. Noah picking up small photography jobs again, laughing more, sleeping through the night. I let myself believe we were past the worst of it. Then came the headaches again. Worse this time. And the phone call at 3:14 in the morning, from a nurse whose voice I didn't recognize. I ran into that hospital room and found him unconscious, machines around him, a doctor's face carefully arranged into the expression I remembered from 30 years of delivering hard news myself. "Mrs. Carter," the doctor said, "there's been a seizure. We're running scans now." I sat beside his bed for 6 hours, holding a hand that didn't hold back, waiting for a truth I already suspected in my bones. The scans showed growth. Fast. Faster than before. "How long?" I asked the doctor, my voice steadier than I felt. "Weeks, possibly a couple of months with treatment." I didn't cry in that hallway. I'd learned decades ago on hospital wards just like this one that grief has a time and place, and the time wasn't yet. I went back into his room and held his hand until his eyes finally opened. "Helen," he whispered, hoarse, "I'm here." "How bad?" I could have lied. I thought about it for half a second. "Bad," I said instead. "But I'm not leaving. Not for one single day of it, however many we have left." Tears slid down the sides of his face, into his hair, onto the pillow. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry I can't give you longer." "You listen to me, Noah Carter." I gripped his hand tighter. "You didn't choose this. You don't get to apologize for something you didn't choose. What you gave me was 2 years I never expected to have. Laughter I thought I'd buried with my husband. A reason to get up every single morning. That is not nothing. That is everything. Even knowing how it ends? Especially knowing how it ends," I said. "I would choose this again. Every single time." The next 3 months were the hardest, and somehow, the most beautiful of my life. We didn't waste them on fear. We filled them instead with everything we could. Small trips when he had the strength, photographs of every ordinary moment, long conversations that went nowhere and everywhere at once. Claire came every week. She and Noah grew close in a way I hadn't expected, the kind of closeness that only comes from shared vigil. "I was wrong about you," she told him once, holding his hand while I made tea in the next room, not quite out of earshot. "I thought you saw an old woman with money. I didn't see a man who'd give anything just to have more time with her." "She saved me," Noah said quietly. "Long before any of this. She saved me first." I stood in the doorway with 2 cups of tea, unable to move for a long moment, letting those words settle somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I'd carry them long after. He died on a Tuesday morning in February. Sunlight coming through the hospital window, my hand in his camera on the table beside the bed, filled with 2 years of photographs neither of us had known would become the whole story. His last words to me were simple. "Thank you for not letting me disappear alone." I sat with him for a long time after, the machine silent, the room impossibly still. I thought about the river, about a stranger crouched by the water with a camera, about every person who'd told me it couldn't be real, that it couldn't last, that the numbers didn't make sense. They were right, that it didn't last. Nothing does, not really, not even the marriages that begin at 25 instead of 72. But it was real. More real than most things I'd known in my long life. People still ask me sometimes, gently or not so gently, whether I regret it. Whether loving someone 47 years younger, only to bury him 2 years later, was worth the grief that followed. I always give them the same answer. I spent 6 years alone after Richard died. Safe, unremarkable, untouched by loss, because I'd stopped letting myself be touched by anything at all. Then a young man with a camera and a broken family of his own reminded me that love doesn't check your age, your bank balance, or how much time you have left before it decides you're worth the risk. It simply asks whether you're brave enough to say yes. I said yes. And even now, some mornings, when the light comes through my kitchen window the way it used to fall across his camera lens, I still believe it was the bravest, truest thing I've ever done. Some love stories aren't measured in years. They're measured in how completely they change you. And mine changed me completely.